The Philippines, an archipelago nation with a rich history and a vibrant culture, has often found itself grappling with the complexities of power, politics, and social order. Throughout the years, the country has witnessed periods of great progress and prosperity, but these have also been punctuated by eras of turmoil and oppression. This complex tapestry of the Philippine experience sets the stage for our exploration of two distinct yet interconnected periods: the martial law era under Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and the war on drugs campaign under Rodrigo Duterte. Both Marcos and Duterte, two figures who rose to the presidency with promises of progress and stability, ultimately left an indelible mark on the nation's history through their controversial and iron-fisted approaches to governance. Their respective regimes, separated by decades, were marked by stark similarities in their methods of consolidating power, silencing dissent, and employing state-sanctioned violence. This deep dive aims to dissect and compare these two tumultuous periods in Philippine history, delving into the motivations, methods, and consequences of their actions. By examining the parallels and divergences between Marcos's martial law and Duterte's war on drugs, we can gain a deeper understanding of their lasting impact on Philippine society and the enduring legacy of these controversial leaders. Ferdinand Marcos Sr., a charismatic lawyer and politician, ascended to the presidency in 1965, promising a nation yearning for progress a future of prosperity and stability. However, beneath the veneer of progress lurked a growing ambition for absolute power. Citing threats from communist insurgents and a deteriorating peace and order situation, Marcos declared martial law on September 21, 1972, a date that would forever be etched in the annals of Philippine history. The declaration ushered in an era of unprecedented control and repression. Marcos consolidated his power, shutting down Congress, muzzling the press, and arresting political opponents, activists, and anyone perceived as a threat to his regime. The military, now an instrument of Marcos's authoritarian rule, became omnipresent, enforcing curfews, conducting warrantless arrests, and instilling fear in the hearts of ordinary citizens. The Marcos regime justified its actions by claiming to restore order and combat corruption. However, behind this facade of national security lay a calculated strategy to silence dissent, eliminate political rivals, and perpetuate Marcos's grip on power. The result was a climate of fear and repression, where basic freedoms were curtailed, and any form of opposition was met with swift and brutal retribution. The impact of martial law on Philippine society was profound and far-reaching. It eroded democratic institutions, stifled dissent, and created a culture of fear that permeated all aspects of life. The economy, initially buoyed by Marcos's ambitious infrastructure projects, eventually succumbed to cronyism, corruption, and mismanagement, leaving the nation mired in debt and economic stagnation. Decades after the fall of the Marcos regime, another strongman emerged on the Philippine political landscape: Rodrigo Duterte. Elected president in 2016, Duterte campaigned on a platform of law and order, promising to eradicate crime and rid the country of illegal drugs. His signature policy, the war on drugs, would become synonymous with his presidency, drawing both praise from supporters and condemnation from human rights groups worldwide. Duterte's approach to tackling the drug problem was unambiguous and brutal. He launched a nationwide campaign characterized by its unrelenting and often extrajudicial approach. Police raids, often conducted in impoverished neighborhoods, became commonplace, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. The government's official figures on drug-related killings remained contested, but human rights groups estimated the death toll to be in the thousands, with many victims alleged to be small-time drug users and pushers. Duterte's rhetoric, often laced with profanity and threats, created a climate of fear and impunity. He openly encouraged the police to kill them all, and promised to protect law enforcers from prosecution. This, coupled with the lack of accountability for the killings, fueled allegations of extrajudicial killings and human rights abuses. The war on drugs, while lauded by some for its perceived effectiveness in reducing crime, drew widespread condemnation for its disregard for due process and the rule of law. Critics argued that the campaign disproportionately targeted the poor and marginalized, while failing to address the root causes of the drug problem. The killings and human rights violations also cast a long shadow over Duterte's legacy, tarnishing the country's international image. While Marcos presented a narrative of a nation teetering on the brink of chaos, the reality was more nuanced. The Philippines in the early 1970s was indeed grappling with various challenges, including economic inequality, social unrest, and a growing communist insurgency. However, these issues were not unique to the Philippines, and many argue that they did not warrant the extreme measures Marcos ultimately employed. The imposition of martial law was met with mixed reactions. Some, particularly those who benefited from the regime's patronage, welcomed it as a necessary step to restore order. However, many others, particularly students, activists, and intellectuals, recognized it for what it was, a blatant power grab. Opposition to Marcos's rule began to simmer, finding expression in clandestine meetings, underground publications, and acts of defiance, albeit often met with swift and brutal repression. The first quarter storm, a series of protests and demonstrations that erupted in the first 3 months of 1970, served as an early indication of the growing discontent among the populace, particularly the youth. These demonstrations, fueled by a potent mix of idealism, anger at corruption, and a yearning for genuine democracy, were met with violent dispersal by security forces, foreshadowing the brutality that would characterize the martial law era. Despite the atmosphere of fear and repression, the spirit of resistance never truly died. Opposition groups ranging from leftist activists to disillusioned members of the elite continued to operate underground, risking their lives to expose the regime's abuses and keep the flame of democracy alive. These individuals and groups, often operating with limited resources and facing constant danger, played a crucial role in documenting human rights violations, providing alternative news sources, and keeping the spirit of resistance alive. Crackdown on dissent in the media. Marcos dismantled democratic institutions and suppressed dissent. He controlled the narrative, silencing opposition. Media became a target. Newspapers and radio stations were shut down. Major media outlets turned into propaganda machines. Censorship was the norm. This chilled public discourse. Filipinos resorted to self-censorship. Marcos used TV and radio to cultivate a cult of personality. Media censorship stifled intellectual discourse. It created a climate of fear and suspicion. Corruption flourished unchecked. This eroded trust in government and the rule of law. The legacy reminds us of democracy's fragility. Economic disparity and the crumbling facade of progress. Marcos justified martial law to address economic inequality, but reality proved different. Early economic growth benefited a select few, widening the gap between rich and poor. Crony capitalism and corruption crippled the economy, leaving massive debt and poverty. Majority struggled as prices soared, unemployment rose, and social services crumbled. Imelda's extravagant spending contrasted with the hardship faced by ordinary Filipinos. This legacy of inequality and cronyism continues to hinder development and fuel unrest. Lives lost and communities torn apart. Duterte's war on drugs unleashed a wave of violence through the poorest neighborhoods of the Philippines. The epicenter was often the cramped alleyways and makeshift homes of urban slums. Here, the human cost of the drug war was most acutely felt. The official narrative painted a picture of hardened criminals meeting a deserved end. However, the reality on the ground told a different story. Many of those killed were small-time users, petty pushers, and individuals caught in the crossfire. The nightly news became a grim catalog of violence, with bodies piling up in the streets. The fear was palpable, seeping into the very fabric of communities. Families lived in a perpetual state of anxiety, never knowing if their loved ones would be the next target. The impact extended far beyond the immediate victims. Children were left orphaned, families torn apart, and communities traumatized. The social fabric of these neighborhoods began to fray under the weight of fear, suspicion, and grief. The drug war, rather than bringing peace, had sown seeds of fear and division, leaving communities shattered and broken. The shadows of impunity, a crisis of accountability and justice. The war on drugs fostered a culture of impunity, shielding perpetrators from accountability. Duterte's rhetoric empowered law enforcers to act with impunity, facing little consequence. Human rights groups documented countless extrajudicial killings, often under the cover of darkness. Victims, often unarmed, were killed with claims of self-defense, contradicting eyewitness accounts. The justice system struggled with the scale of killings, burdened by inefficiency and corruption. Investigations were perfunctory, with police rarely held accountable. Lack of transparency and obstruction of investigations fueled allegations of state-sanctioned killings. Vigilante groups emboldened by Duterte carried out street justice. These groups targeted suspected drug users, adding to the climate of fear and violence. The failure to hold perpetrators accountable eroded public trust in the justice system. It sent a message that some lives were expendable, particularly those in poverty. The pursuit of justice for victims became a long, arduous battle, met with indifference and threats. International condemnation and the erosion of human rights. The brutality of the war on drugs did not go unnoticed by the international community. Human rights organizations raised alarm bells about the escalating violence. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the United Nations condemned the killings. The Philippine government responded with defiance and denial. Duterte lashed out at his critics, accusing them of meddling. He withdrew the Philippines from the International Criminal Court. Despite deflecting criticism, international condemnation impacted the Philippines' global standing. The country's image was tarnished by the brutality of the drug war. Foreign investors and tourism suffered due to the violence and impunity. The erosion of human rights extended beyond the immediate victims. Journalists critical of the government were harassed and intimidated. Opposition figures were silenced, creating a chilling effect on free speech. The legacy of the war on drugs serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy. It is a cautionary tale of unchecked power and the erosion of human dignity. Echoes of authoritarianism, a comparative lens on power and control. Marcos's martial law and Duterte's war on drugs might seem worlds apart. One, a calculated seizure of power amidst Cold War anxieties. The other, a populist campaign fueled by public fear of crime. Yet, beneath these narratives lie echoes of authoritarianism, revealing striking similarities. Both leaders exploited existing anxieties and vulnerabilities within Philippine society. Marcos capitalized on fears of communist insurgency, presenting himself as the nation's savior. Duterte tapped into anxieties about crime and illegal drugs, promising swift action. Both leaders understood the power of spectacle and propaganda in shaping public perception. Marcos projected an image of progress and unity, masking repression and corruption. Duterte cultivated a cult of personality, resonating with a public disillusioned with traditional politics. Both shared a disregard for democratic institutions and the rule of law. They concentrated power within their inner circles, often with little regard for due process. This erosion of democratic norms highlights the vulnerability of democratic processes to strongman rule. Section 2. The Machinery of Repression, Tactics of Fear and Silencing Dissent. The success of both Marcos's martial law and Duterte's war on drugs relied heavily on instilling fear and silencing dissent. Both regimes employed similar tactics of repression, using state apparatus and manipulating public perception to quash opposition. Central to their strategies was targeting individuals and institutions critical of their rule. Marcos silenced journalists, activists, and political opponents through arrests and media closures. Duterte used the legal system and propaganda to target human rights defenders and opposition figures. Both regimes understood the power of fear in controlling the population. The threat of arrest or death created a climate of self-censorship. This culture of fear silenced public discourse in questioning the government's narrative. Both Marcos and Duterte used propaganda to shape public perception and legitimize their actions. Marcos used state-controlled media to portray martial law as necessary to restore order. Duterte leveraged social media and pro-government influencers to justify the drug war. The parallels in their tactics highlight the fragility of democratic institutions. They remind us of the importance of safeguarding freedom of speech, a free press, and an independent judiciary. Navigating the tides of fear and defiance. Despite fear and repression, resistance persisted in both Marcos's martial law and Duterte's war on drugs. Public perception was shaped by propaganda and fear, yet defiance revealed the enduring human spirit. Pockets of resistance emerged, fueled by belief in democracy and human rights. Their resilience highlights the power of hope and collective action. Section 1. The Unfulfilled Promises. Assessing the Effectiveness of Iron Fists. Both Marcos and Duterte justified their heavy-handed tactics as necessary evils for national security and progress. They promised swift solutions to deeply entrenched problems, appealing to a public weary of crime and instability. However, their policies resulted in unfulfilled promises, unintended consequences, and a heavy toll on Philippine society. Marcos presided over rampant cronyism and economic stagnation. His regime's initial economic growth proved unsustainable, benefiting a select few. The promised eradication of corruption remained elusive. Duterte's war on drugs also fell short of its goals. The campaign led to a decrease in crime rates, but at a heavy cost. Poverty, inequality, and corruption remained unaddressed. The failure of both regimes highlights the flawed logic of authoritarian solutions. Silencing dissent and curtailing freedoms created more problems than they solved. Section 2. The Social Fabric Torn, Examining the Unintended Consequences. Beyond their failure to achieve their stated objectives, both martial law and the war on drugs unleashed a cascade of unintended consequences that continue to reverberate through Philippine society. By prioritizing order and control over human rights and due process, both regimes sowed seeds of fear, division, and distrust that eroded the very fabric of Filipino communities. One of the most insidious consequences of both eras was the normalization of violence and the erosion of the rule of law. The widespread use of extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and torture, often carried out with impunity, created a climate of fear and lawlessness that permeated all levels of society. This erosion of accountability not only emboldened perpetrators, but also instilled a deep sense of vulnerability and distrust in institutions meant to protect citizens. The targeting of specific communities, often based on poverty, religion, or political affiliation, further exacerbated existing social divisions. Marcos's regime targeted suspected communists, activists, and critics, while Duterte's war on drugs disproportionately impacted impoverished urban communities. This selective persecution not only fueled resentment and mistrust, but also created a climate of fear and self-censorship, hindering open dialogue and stifling dissent. The trauma inflicted during these periods continues to cast a long shadow on Filipino society. Families of victims of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances still struggle for justice and closure, haunted by the loss of loved ones and the lack of accountability. The psychological scars of fear, repression, and the normalization of violence continue to affect individuals and communities, hindering healing and reconciliation. The long-term impact of these periods underscores the importance of addressing the root causes of violence and ensuring that justice and accountability are upheld to prevent future abuses. The legacy of violence and the struggle for justice. The legacies of martial law and the war on drugs shape the Philippines today. The struggle for justice and a more equitable society remains ongoing. Families of victims demand truth, justice, and reparations. Human rights organizations, journalists, and activists document abuses and push for reforms. These experiences fuel appreciation for democracy and human rights. Civil society and citizens demand accountability and transparency. The legacy of violence ignites a vibrant arts and culture scene. Artists contribute to remembrance, reflection, and healing. The resilience of the Filipino people offers hope for a better future. The weight of history, shaping national identity and political consciousness. The collective memory of martial law and the war on drugs shapes national identity and political consciousness. The scars of these periods remind us of democracy's fragility and the struggle for human rights. Historical narratives reflect deep divisions within Philippine society. The Marcos regime enjoys nostalgia among some, despite its atrocities. Revisionist history seeks to whitewash past abuses. Victims and advocates fight against historical revisionism. The struggle for truth and justice defines the Philippine experience. Lessons learned and the unfinished struggle. The Philippines today stands at a crossroads, grappling with its tumultuous past and navigating a fragile democracy. Lessons from martial law and the war on drugs remind Filipinos to safeguard democratic institutions and uphold human rights. A vigilant and informed citizenry is crucial. Erosion of democratic norms can be insidious. Free media and civil society are essential against tyranny. The struggle for justice and accountability remains unfinished. Pursuing truth and reparations is vital for healing. An independent judicial system ensures accountability. Addressing root causes of social ills is crucial. Poverty, inequality, and corruption create fertile ground for unrest. Investing in education and healthcare is essential. The journey towards a just future is continuous. By learning from the past and demanding accountability, Filipinos can create a society that upholds human dignity and rights. Section 1. A Shared History, a Divided Future. The narratives of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., martial law, and Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs stand as stark testaments to the enduring tensions between power, control, and the pursuit of justice in the Philippines. Though separated by decades, these two periods reveal unsettling parallels in their methods, their justifications, and their enduring impact on the Filipino psyche. Both serve as cautionary tales, reminding us that the allure of authoritarian solutions often masks a brutal reality of human rights abuses, eroded freedoms, and a social fabric deeply scarred by violence and impunity. The Philippines today grapples with the weight of this shared history, a history marked by both remarkable resilience and a vulnerability to strongman rule. The scars of martial law and the war on drugs are deeply etched in the national consciousness, shaping political discourse, fueling artistic expression, and igniting passionate debates about truth, accountability, and the meaning of justice. The ghosts of these periods linger in the halls of power, in the testimonies of victims, and in the hearts of families torn apart by violence and loss. The path forward for the Philippines is fraught with challenges. The allure of simplistic solutions, the persistence of corruption, and the fragility of democratic institutions remain ever-present threats. Yet amidst these challenges there is also hope. The resilience of the Filipino people, their unwavering spirit, and their enduring belief in the possibility of a more just and equitable society offer a beacon of light. The struggle for a better future continues, fueled by the memories of the past and the unwavering determination to ensure that the mistakes of history are not repeated. The stories of martial law and the war on drugs are not merely chapters in a history book. They are living narratives woven into the fabric of Philippine society. It is through understanding these narratives, confronting the complexities of the past, and actively engaging in the pursuit of justice and accountability that the Philippines can truly move forward, forging a future where human rights are respected, democratic institutions are strengthened, and the echoes of authoritarianism are silenced by the voices of a free and empowered citizenry.